Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Chairman of the China Committee, the Select Chinese Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, Representative Mike Gallagher. I've got my Green Bay Packers hat on that Representative Gallagher made me wear when the rickety Aaron Rodgers beat the terrible and injury-plagued Cleveland Browns last year. But rickety Rodgers is gone. He's a Jet, thanks to the Cleveland Browns giving the Jets a second rounder to trade for rickety Aaron Rodgers. Are you happy or sad, Congressman Gallagher?
Listen, it's the end of an era. I love Aaron Rodgers. He was an incredible quarterback. I think the trade worked out pretty well for us. We move up to 13. We get a 6th-rounder, and we'll get another 1st-rounder if Rodgers plays at least 65% of the snaps, which he will in New York unless he gets injured. So I don't know. I think the trade worked out pretty well for us. We'll see.
And you get the second rounder that the Browns sent. You get the second rounder that the Browns sent to the Jets for Elijah Moore. So it's basically the Browns helping out the Packers.
As you did last season too, though we didn't take advantage of that help. We screwed it up.
That's it. Let's go to the war game. I want to get to the war game.
With the Browns bench, does it come with the unluckiness of the Browns? The pick is probably.
I'm not talking football now. I got to get to the real stuff. I just had John Walters on who said we can do Ukraine and China. I had Bridge Colby on Monday who said we can only do China. I don't care what you think about that. I want to know about the war game because I still don't know. I want you to just hold forth on what happened when the Select Committee played a war game.
The PLA massed an invasion force and preemptively struck our positions on Okinawa and Guam, so deterrence failed. Through 6 days, we sunk 80 PLA ships in the Strait. That's a lot, largely thanks to our undersea capabilities and our long-range anti-ship missiles. But nevertheless, 80,000 PLA troops gained what's called a lodgment on the main island of Taiwan. They were able to get 80,000 troops on Taiwan despite that loss of their ships. We used up all of our best ammo, our long-range precision fires, within 1 week of fighting. I was also surprised at the extent to which economic and financial weapons were used, but U.S. economic sanctions, though they impose crippling costs on Chinese banks, many of our allies, even G7 partners, our closest allies, hesitated to join the sanctions regime. And then finally, the Chinese losses were very heavy after 6 days. We were nowhere close to breaking the PLA's will to fight, and they were starting to use commercial ships to continue the invasion. Unfortunately, we only had 2 hours, so we couldn't go beyond 2 moves, but that was the basic summary of what happened in the game.
When you walked in, and it was run by the Center for New American Security, a very respectable group, and they're bipartisan, did you know what the CCP's first move would be?
I did not. Deliberately, I didn't want to game the game. I wanted there to be actual critical thinking. And Hugh, listen, there are obvious limits to what you can do in that short period of time, particularly when the players are busy and they're coming in from other stuff and you don't have time to do a lot of homework. But there's something about the format of just kind of having members around a map, having an interactive discussion that I actually thought afterwards stimulated more thinking than your standard congressional hearing where it's 5 minutes, scripted, this and that. And so I'm increasingly intrigued by the idea of using gaming or non-traditional fora like this to force a collaborative and creative discussion among members. And it's something I've said on your program quite frequently is, in my 6 years on the Armed Services Committee, we've actually never had, even with the Indo-Pacific commander, just a no-holds-barred discussion around a map that just talked about kind of the basic geography at play here. And one thing I've been advocating for a while is for Congress to be brought into the DoD wargaming process. A final thought on gaming, Hugh. Again, despite its limits, I think it would be increasingly useful for Pentagon or defense-focused gamers to incorporate high-level people from Wall Street, from the financial and manufacturing community in order to tease out what's going to happen when we impose sanctions or when the Chinese start to weaponize supply chains. And these things tend to be separated. We tend not to incorporate the economic and financial dimensions of games.
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I should call you, I would love for you and the committee to do a Saturday, Sunday game and go actually run two with two different opening moves. And I would expand CNES. I would add in Jerry Hendricks and maybe the Hudson Institute and have 3 or 4 people playing the red team, the CCP team, because that's a very bold opening move. What did they do? They struck us. They went to war. They preemptively struck the Okinawa base and what is it? Yakuza and not Yakuza. That's a crime thing. I can't remember the air base in Japan. They struck the Japanese air base.
They struck Guam and they struck Okinawa. It's interesting. In games I've played previously, they've struck our positions in Hawaii. There were also cyber attacks against domestic infrastructure on the U.S. homeland. One of the big takeaways is that Las Vegas rules won't apply. What happens in the Taiwan Strait won't stay there. It will quickly escalate. This was also something that happened in the war game we did with the Republican conference with Admiral Mark Montgomery and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and as well as Ben Jensen from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So we're going forward. We're going to try and do a few different ones of these. I know various think tanks have their own version of games. Interestingly enough, if you talk to former Speaker Gingrich, his argument is that Congress used to have its own organic wargaming capability that was located at the National Defense University, but was a dedicated space where Congress could actually routinely play games. It could be interesting if you revived a version of that. And think whenever we have a big executive or a Wall Street asset manager coming to visit us in DC, imagine if you ran them through an hour and a half of a game. I think they would tend no longer to discount the likelihood or the costs of a deterrence failure across the Taiwan Strait. And I recently met with one of the leading asset managers in America, and he said there's a near zero probability of Xi Jinping invading Taiwan. And I was dumbfounded. My jaw hit the floor. I think that's almost a dereliction of fiduciary responsibility if that's how you're thinking about this.
Chairman Gallagher, did your Democratic colleagues give a reaction similar to your Republican colleagues, or was it different? Did they dispute this opening sentence? How did they respond?
I think the major difference was after the game in terms of what do we do going forward. And we're going to have a policy discussion tonight. It'll be a closed-door policy discussion, but we're going to have Admiral Mark Montgomery and some other experts to guide us in order to identify what are the things we can do to enhance near-term deterrence. I think that on the Democratic side, it's fair to say they're prioritizing the idea of engagement as a successful way to diffuse this crisis. Whereas, and I'll only speak for myself, I was reading Secretary Yellen's speech, which was all about how we need to engage with the CCP, we need to engage with China to promote peace. And I thought, well, we've tried engagement for 2 decades and it's failed. So the idea that we're just going to engage harder and that engagement is somehow going to amount to deterrence, I don't believe that. So I think that being said, I think there's agreement on the idea that, of course, we should have some sort of crisis communication channel where our military people can pick up the phone if things are heating up and say, hey, let's avoid some miscommunication. But here's the thing, Hugh, and this gets to the engagement hypothesis and why it continues to fail. We've actually tried for the last 5 years to reestablish such a channel, and the Chinese refuse to meet us halfway. And right now, it seems like the Biden administration is chasing Chinese officials around the world, desperately trying to have a meeting. They are what Matt Turpin has called an ardent suitor for a meeting with the CCP, hoping that engaging just for the sake of engagement will produce positive results. So I think that's one meaningful difference that I see between the parties. And of course, my bias is that only hard power deters. That's the best form of communication, to put hard power.
I wish you could get your Democratic colleagues to do what I've been rereading Alone, the second volume in the Manchester biography of Churchill. It's from 1932 to 1939. In it, Manchester says of Neville Chamberlain, no one could shake his faith in appeasement, not even Adolf Hitler. And I had to write that down and look it up because no matter what Hitler did, Neville Chamberlain just thought it was a question of price. He really just thought, what does he need? He's a mercurial guy. We can make him happy. Let's not make him angry. Let's keep him happy. And he was wrong, 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 wrong. It led to World War. I don't know if your colleagues are, but Joe Biden certainly is an apostle of modern day appeasement. Now it's a dirty word. It wasn't in the 30s. It was an ideology that was embraced and believed. And people talked about, I'm an appeaser, and it wasn't a dirty word. Well, I think Joe Biden is an appeaser, and Tony Blinken is an appeaser, and they're not even good at appeasing because they can't get the meeting to give anything away.
Well, I think one mistake we make, and really these were the mistakes leading up to the failure of deterrence in Ukraine, is that Western officials, U.S. officials, particularly those in power now, tend to mirror image. We sort of foist our set of values onto brutal dictators like Putin and Xi, and we assume that they are rational actors, that somehow they're sitting there calculating the economic utility of making this or that move. As I look at Xi Jinping, of course, he, takes financial considerations into account, but he's also a profoundly ideological actor. And he's acting out this form of sort of grievance politics and sort of an attempt to redeem China for, a century of humiliation that is not really rational if you think about it. And I think that's a mistake we often make, and it's a very dangerous mistake to make. And even if these actors are facing enormous economic and demographic headwinds, it could make them more dangerous in the short term as they attempt to do things in order to distract their populace from the very real problems that they've imposed upon their own citizens. So we have to be very careful.
Very quickly. Are they rational as a dictator is rational, say like Hitler or like Putin? They have a vision, they act rationally according to their vision, but they're not rational in Western terms. I think that's a different deal, because I think Xi is very cold-blooded. He's just got, you got to stick around for another segment if you want to answer that. We can't even talk to you.
If they probe with bayonets, if they find steel, they stop. If they find mush, they push. That level of dictator rationality is at play.
That's where they are. Representative Gallagher, congratulations on the Browns helping out your Packers. Thank you for joining me. I finally know what happened in the war game.